Right, you're supposed to listen to this audio after you have watched the Zoom recording, which is for 35 minutes. All right. So we're going to continue on a little bit more of Ghazali and his discussion of the ways of the Sufis, which is in your reading pad, page 287. You just have to do 2 pages. It's from 287 to 289. All right. And the last point is 89 itself. Okay. So 80 se lekar 89 is 9 points. These are included in your obligatory reading. You can go on and read the rest, of course, but this is the obligatory part. Now, we discussed Sufism and how it originated, right? And some of the very famous Sufis, for example, early on, even in the 8th century, so like a bit over a century after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, was Hassan al-Basri, rahimahullah. He's very famous for being a person who talked about zuhud, asceticism, right? Not having love for the world. I already mentioned this in class, I believe, that the love for the world is defined, love for dunya is defined as anything which becomes an obstacle in our becoming closer to Allah, becomes an obstacle in our striving for the hereafter. That becomes negative dunya ki muhabbat, right? It's a negative form of love for the world. But other than that, everything else in the dunya take us to that akhirah. So whatever we sow in this world, we get in the akhirah, right? So the world is actually a place where we sow the seeds, the fruits of which we'll see in the akhirah. I don't remember if I mentioned this before, but the dunya is basically like the ocean, and your heart is like a boat in it, right? So the understanding is that you do need this dunya to go through it, right? To reach your end and to reach the akhirah. But if you let that water of the ocean come into the boat, it will cause the boat to sink. So not to have love for the world, right? Love for attachments, for material wealth, not to have it to such an extent that it causes you to be heedless of Allah, heedless of the akhirah, right? Heedless of the other life. So after Hassan Basri, you have Rabia Basri. You might have heard of her, a very famous Sufi woman in the early 8th century. Sorry, the early 9th century, 801. I think she passed away in 801. You have Junaid al-Baghdadi, you know, Rumi, right? Who was a student of Shams Tabriz. What is his story? He too, like Ghazali, was a student of knowledge, right? So these people were students of knowledge. They knew the Quran and the Sunnah, but now they want fruitional experience. They want to experience whatever they know in theory. So almost, tasawwuf or Islamic spirituality is the practice of the theory that you already know. So you will, I hope, at this point, realize and appreciate that even, for example, praying and fasting are, practical, implementations and manifestations of the theory of Islamic law of the deen, right? So some people actually completely disregard, Sufi teachings as something separate. They just say that, the salah, the 5 times prayer and the fasting should get you where you need to go. But, the issue arises later on. It arises many centuries after the Prophet ﷺ, when people start to ask these questions, such as I pray but I'm unable to concentrate in my namaz. Now this issue was not present in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So this question arises later on when the souls or the heart, the qalb, is unable for different reasons to feel that presence of Allah, which was not there. This issue was not there before. That is why particularly this branch became so famous, Islamic spirituality of tasawwuf, because now it's focusing on new questions, just like ijtihad. We talked about ijtihad, just focusing on new issues that are arising and you need answers to that. Similarly, the spiritual self was coming up with these questions which were never there before. So why am I not able to remember Allah in my namaz? So a famous Sufi answer would be, even a scholar can tell you that, right? So this is not, a Sufi cannot be a person who is not following fiqh. So hopefully you've already heard that, right? That there is no fiqh without tasawwuf and no tasawwuf without fiqh. So they go hand in hand. So a scholar will answer that if the entire day you're not thinking about Allah, you're not thinking about His attributes, and all you're doing is going on about your normal business, you mundane chores, everyday life, then how is it possible that in your salah you will remember God? Is it even possible, right? Just like when you need practice, when you go into a ring where you have to wrestle with someone, or you go for a match, right? You need all that work beforehand, all that practice beforehand for you to be able to perform in that manner, in that match when you have. And people won't be able to see all that practice you've done, but your performance in that match will show, right? Iqbal, our own poet, Allama Iqbal is one amazing example of a person who knew, the depths of these things so well. So he writes in his one of his poems, I'll just say the last part, Kabhi Ae Haqiqat-e Muntazir, I think is the name of the poem. But at the end he says, when I did sajda once, right, to my Lord, that I could hear from the land, from the zameen that I was doing sajda on, tera dil to hai sanam ashna tujhe kya milega namaz mein, that your heart is full of idols, right? So you don't need to worship idols in physical form in reality. The idols can be in the heart as well, right? So your heart is filled with idols. Tujhe kya milega namaz mein? What are you going to get in your salah? What are you going to get in your daily 5 prayers, right? How are you going to feel God if your heart is not filled with His love, but it's filled with idols? It's filled with the love of the world. It's filled with love of fame. It's filled with love of yourself, maybe filled with other loves other than Allah, right? So that's the background. You have Ibn Arabi, a very famous Sufi who was born in Spain, right, Andalusian. He's also very, very famous, and I also have a PDF book of his, Jewels of Wisdom. I think that's what it's called, translated as that. Or he talks about adorning yourself, right, with the attributes of Allah. So, for example, Allah is merciful, right? Adorning ourselves with mercy, right? Allah is loving and wadud, so adorning yourself with that attribute. Adorning yourself with all of those attributes of Allah that can be adorned by humans, right? For example, He's mutakabbir, but that cannot be adorned. So it does not befit humans to have pride. It does not befit us. But Allah is mutakabbir, right? So that attribute is particularly just for Allah. But there are many, many others that can be sort of reflected, that can reflect in our lives, and we can act on them, right? We can try to inculcate them in ourselves. Have I left anyone out? Many other famous Sufi names, maybe you can also mention some of them. So Ghazali now, as I told you, he was already he was a head professor, right, in the Nizamiya College in Baghdad, and with even, the admin, the authority. He didn't have any issues over there, but what happened was that inwardly, he just felt this, right, that he was so intelligent, and theoretically he had all this knowledge, right, but now suddenly while he's teaching, he says, I was unable to teach further. Okay, so he says, theory was easier for me than practice. This is 81, point 81 on page 287. Therefore, I began to learn their lore for the perusal of their books, such as The Food of the Hearts by Abu Talib al-Makki, and the writings of Al-Harith al-Muhasibi, and the miscellaneous items handed down from Al-Junayd and Al-Shibli and Abu Yazid al-Bistami. So all these famous names of Sufis and others of their masters. As a result, I came to know the core of their theoretical aims, and I learned all that could be learned of their way by study and hearing. Then it became clear to me that their most distinctive characteristics is something that can be attained not by study, but rather by functional experience and the state of ecstasy and the exchange of qualities. How great a difference there is between your knowing the definitions and causes and conditions of health and your being healthy and sated, right? So how different in you just knowing that these are the articles of faith and you actually believing in them. How different, right? How great a difference there is between your knowing the definition of drunkenness and you're actually being drunk. Indeed, a drunken man, while he is drunk, does not know the definition and concept of drunkenness and has no knowledge of it. But a physician knows the definition and the elements of drunkenness, though he is experiencing no actual drunkenness. So also, when a physician is ill, he knows the definition and causes of health and the remedies, though he is then actually bereft of health. Similarly, too, there is a difference between your knowing the true nature and conditions and causes of asceticism and you're actually practicing asceticism and personally shunning the things of this world. So you may have, you know what it means, asceticism. You know what it means when you talk about suhada, leaving the world, but you're actually experiencing it will be a completely different matter. I knew with certainty that the Sufis were masters of states, not purveyors of words, right? So Sufis are masters of states, and they're not just saying things, but they have felt it. And I had learned all I could by way of theory. They remained, so Ghazali is saying now, they remained then only what was attainable, not by hearing and study, but by functional experience and actually engaging in the way. From the sciences which I had practiced and the methods which I had followed in my inquiry into the two kinds of knowledge, revealed and rational. So remember, Ghazali is, always philosophically explaining that revelation and reason, they go hand in hand together. So he's studied all of these things. He's a philosopher as well, a theologian. I had already acquired a sure, certain faith in God Most High, in the prophetic mediation of revelation, and the last day. These three fundamentals of our faith had become deeply rooted in my soul, not because of any specific, precisely formulated proofs, but because of reasons and circumstances and experiences too many to list in detail. It had already become clear to me, I'm on point 84 now, on page 288. It had already become clear to me that my only hope of attaining beatitude, what it means is, it's like a noun of beautiful, right? In the afterlife, lay in piety and restraining my soul from passion. The beginning of all that I knew was to sever my heart's attachment to the world by withdrawing from this abode of delusion and turning to the mansion of immortality and devoting myself with total ardor to God Most High. That I knew could be achieved only by shunning fame and fortune and fleeing from my preoccupations and attachments. Okay, so he's teaching at this moment, and this is why it's called his autobiography, this book, right? So he explains what happened, because a lot of people were confused when he left his post, right, at Baghdad, because for them, he says it was one of the best posts and one of the highest, status that you can reach in religion, right? He says in point 85 now, next I attentively considered my circumstances, and I saw that I was immersed in attachments which had encompassed me from all sides. I also considered my activities, the best of them being public and private instruction, and that in them I was applying myself to sciences unimportant and useless in this pilgrimage to the hereafter. So he's saying, all the sciences that I'm teaching is just not going to help me in the hereafter. I need to work on myself. Then I reflected on my intention in my public teaching, and I saw that it was not directed purely to God, but rather was instigated and motivated by the quest for fame and widespread prestige. So he finds this in himself. Other people are not finding this in himself. Nobody says that about Ghazali, right? Nizam al-Mulk, who was the Sultan at that time, the Seljuk Sultan, he was very impressed, and he was the one who had put him in this position, right, of head professor. Nobody's saying that he's just inside his heart now, right? And so he writes, Ghazali says, so I became certain that I was on the brink of a crumbling bank and already on the verge of falling into the fire, unless I set about mending my ways. Point 86, I therefore reflected unceasingly on this for some time, while I still had freedom of choice, which is very interesting now. What is he saying? While he had freedom of choice. What he's implying here is this very deep understanding, which we've done again and again, and we can't, underestimate this importance of the free will and versus predestination debate. What he's saying is that for a long time, a person keeps having this call towards God or towards something, right? If they're not acting upon it, they keep shunning it, eventually that gate that has opened will close, that door that has opened will close. So he's saying, while I still had freedom of choice, and eventually he's saying there will be a time when it becomes fate. He sealed his fate in the sense that he didn't follow it, he didn't do anything about it, right? So he feels he has freedom of choice at that moment, right? He's explaining this time now. He's explaining his state. He's saying, one day I would firmly resolve to leave Baghdad and disengage myself from those circumstances. And another day I would revoke my resolution. I would put one foot forward and the other backward. In the morning I would have a sincere desire to seek the things of the afterlife, but by evening the hosts of passion would assail it and render it lukewarm. So his passion of working on himself for the afterlife became lukewarm, right, by evening. Mundane desires began tugging me with their chains to remain as I was, while the herald of faith was crying out, away, up and away, only a little is left of your life, and a long journey lies before you. All the theory and practice in which you are engrossed is eye service and fakery. If you do not prepare now for the afterlife, when will you do so? And if you do not sever these attachments now, then when will you sever them? At such thoughts, the call would reassert itself. Point 87. And I would make an irrevocable decision to run off and escape. Then Shaitan would return into attack and say, this is a passing state, beware of yielding to it, for it will quickly vanish. Once you have given into it and given up your present result. So what is Shaitan saying to him? Okay, if you leave this job right now and splendid position, free from vexation, and renounce your secure situation, untroubled by the contention of your adversaries, your soul might again look longingly at all that. Shaitan is saying that what will you do? You'll regret it. So don't do this. Don't leave this position. Don't go off wandering around in this weird, because of this weird passing state you are in. Sahi? But it would not be easy to return to it. Point 88 on page 289. Thus, I incessantly vacillated between the contending pull of worldly desires and the appeals of the afterlife for about 6 months, starting with Rajab of the year 488, 1095 AD, right? In this month, the matter passed from choice to compulsion, for God put a lock upon my tongue. Ab kya hua ki he just could not teach anymore. And he was going through this state, but then suddenly, Allah ki taraf se kya hua, he says that he couldn't teach anymore, so that I was impeded from public teaching. I struggled with myself to teach for a single day, to gratify the hearts of the students who were frequenting my lectures, but my tongue would not utter a single word. I was completely unable to say anything. As a result, that impediment of my speech caused a sadness in my heart, accompanied by an inability to digest food and drink. Food and drink became unpalatable to me. Now, he's not really explaining what caused him, like why is he unable to teach. It's something that is bothering him in his heart, which is manifesting now in his body. He's just unable to keep on doing what he's doing because he's unsatisfied by it, right? Okay, so that led to such a weakening of my powers that the physicians lost hope of treating me and said, this is something which has settled in his heart and crept from it into his humors. There is no way to treat it unless his heart be eased of the anxiety which has visited it. Point 89. Then when I perceived my powerlessness, and when my capacity to make a choice had completely collapsed, I had recourse to God Most High, as does a hard-pressed man who has no way out of his difficulty. And I was answered by him who answers the needy man when he calls on him. And he made it easy for my heart to turn away from fame and fortune, family, children, and associates. I announced that I had resolved to leave for Makkah, all the while planning secretly to travel to Syria. So he did both. He went for pilgrimage later on, but primarily he intended to go to Syria, right? For his seclusion, for his meditation, working on himself. This I did as a precaution lest the Caliph and the group of my associates might learn of my resolve to settle in Damascus. Therefore, I made clever use of subtle stratagems about leaving Baghdad. While firmly resolved never to return to it, I was much talked about by the religious leaders of the Iraqis, since none among them could allow that giving up my career had a religious motive. They couldn't understand that his leaving this post could have a religious motive. They thought they thought that my post was the highest dignity in our religion, and that was the farthest limit they had attained in learning. So he's saying, according to them, it was like he's leaving a good, religious opportunity, something that is gaining him reward. Why is he leaving? So they couldn't understand it, he's saying. But for him, it's much, much more important than this job that he had, because he felt that he had a lot of internal work that needed to be done. right? So this is almost 20 minutes. Start to do the obligatory part. You can keep on reading if you want. That is recommended, but it's not obligatory. This part is obligatory for you guys, right? If there are any questions, now you guys should use this WhatsApp group and ask questions and discuss. ठीक है? After you have listened to both the Zoom recording and this audio note.